Well, welcome. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us in this conversation today as we think about what it is that as mediators we should be thinking about, we should be doing, ways we should be engaging with folks who have these perceived conflicts with one another. And so oftentimes, more often than not, this notion of conflict is an illusion, right? So, and Andre, what do you mean by that? How can a conflict, a real conflict that I'm having, how can that be seen as an illusion? Well, oftentimes we are very much after similar things, right? So the things that that other people want are very similar to the things that I'm after, the things that I want, the things that I'm interested in, and it is in that gap where we between what you think and what I think. The values that we hold are very, very much alike and very similar. However, the methodology, the meaning, those are the things that oftentimes cause us to believe that we are in conflict with one another, right? So it's those things that that lead us oftentimes to believe that we are in conflict. And I would say that often, if we give enough attention, if we give enough time to recognizing that, we're oftentimes able to see that we're after very similar things, but it's our approaches that may be very different, right? And so typically when I'm in workshop or before we start, kind of mixing it up in terms of looking at a conversation around conflict, I usually engage people in this thoughtful process of talking about or trying to define what it is that we're talking about, right? So in this diagram, what you may see is two individuals approaching each other in trying to come to a common understanding. But one person sees the objective reality as a 9, and the other one sees the objective reality as a 6. And so the question is, are they wrong with how they see the world? And I would suggest that they are not wrong in how they see the world, right? And so what that suggests is that we have to pivot from this notion of right and wrong, because I'm sure you've heard people say things like live your truth, right? Or perspectives or perception is reality. I don't know if you've heard people say that, and I would obviously there is some truth to that, but there are some truths that are universal. As an example, I love my grandmother, but I cannot bring her back to life. Right. So as much as that is a truth that is irrefutable, right? So and I'm sure that there are, folks who believe that they have or can or whatnot. But I personally cannot, and I haven't experienced anyone who could actually bring someone back to life or animate a thing, right? So there are these absolute truths, but when we talk about this notion of conflict, oftentimes the conflict arises because the people have assumptions that they're carrying, and it's the lack of communication that oftentimes drives the conflict, right? So either an inability to communicate clearly, and sometimes it's people don't have the desire to communicate clearly to other folks, and sometimes it's just we don't have the skill to do it, right? So when we're engaging in conflict, it's important to recognize that we oftentimes want very similar things, but it's our methods for acquiring, our methods for understanding, our methods of communicating those very similar values is sometimes what drives us into this place of conflict, right? So let's talk a little bit more about these ground rules and the impact it can have on navigating conflict. So one of the things that's important is for us to focus on the goals, right? So I remember as a young man playing Atari 2600. So I'm dating myself. And we had one joystick and one button, right? Unlike young people today who have a myriad of buttons and commands and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm playing Atari 2600, and there is one rule in my house that kind of trumped all the others, and that was you don't talk back. So if my mother or my father said a thing, you acted on that thing without complaint, right, or without opinions. And so I'm playing Atari 2600. My dad says, Andre, take out the trash. Now, what he doesn't understand is that this is Contra. And I'm on the level where I have a machine gun and I'm killing these aliens and I'm about to win the whole thing. And so his request, his statement to take out the trash was in direct conflict with the goals of me trying to reach this last level, right, in the game. And so I wasn't thinking. I recognize, I know the rules. I know what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know what happened, but it just slipped out. And I told him to wait a minute. Now, my parents were old school, and statements like that are not allowed to slip out, right? And so my father addressed that statement. And so his original intention was for me to take out the trash, and we ended up talking about my behavior. And as a result of our interaction, I lost my privileges for the Atari 2600. I was sent to my room, which at that time there was no other entertainment but books, right? So I was sent to my room, and my father lost focus of his original goal, which was for me to take out the trash. Now, it's sometime later, he came back to his senses and said, Andre, take that trash out. But a lot of time was lost in that process, right? And so I saw that, and I sought to manipulate that as a young man, right? And so oftentimes we got into, and you may have heard this declared a power struggle, right? So my father and I found ourselves oftentimes in power struggles. However, what I didn't recognize is, it was power struggles. So taking us off of focus. And so my father at some point really got hip to this. This is probably like a couple of days, but in kid life, it was a long time. Got hip to this. And so he would just repeat himself. He wouldn't engage my behavior. We'd talk about the behavior later, but he would say, Andre, take out the trash. And I'd say, but, and he'd say, Andre, I need you to stop what you're doing and go take care of that trash. And the funny thing is I would continue to try to hook him to talk about my behavior by addressing or questioning his timing or his request, or I pretend like I wasn't clear, but the whole time I'm preparing to take out the trash as I'm doing this, right? And so although there was still some behaviors that had to be talked about, the initial goal that he had of me taking out the trash was accomplished, right? And so sometimes when we get into helping people navigate through conflict, they'll try to take us down rabbit trails, or they'll add in things that in fact may be important to them, but don't actually help us solve the essential conflict or problem, or come to an understanding, right? And so, and as a facilitator of this process, it becomes important for us to stay focused, laser focused on the goals. And so how do I know what the goals are of this interaction? And I know that because I ask the participants what their goals are. Right. So what are your goals of this interaction? And so what do we do when we have goals that may be conflicting? Right? They may be conflicting goals. What do we do with that? Well, we back up one step further and go back to the values. So so in the rare occurrence that we can't come up with a goal of our session, I ask, when this session is over, how would you like to feel? Right? So how would you, what does success feel like for you, as opposed to what is success for you, right? Because one of the things that we have to recognize, and we'll get to this in just a second, is that the emotional part of our helping people navigate through conflict is just as important as the thing we try to solve, right? So how people feel about the success of the engagement is just as important as the problem that we solve, right? And we'll talk about why that is in just a second, right? So the other thing that does is that produces for us an opportunity to align our thoughts and our behaviors. And you've heard me say this several times, that oftentimes people are operating mindlessly. Now, not saying that they don't have a mind, but they are not oftentimes conscious of what they say. And this is where these microaggressions oftentimes come from. This is where those cultural, racial cliches come from, right? Like, there's too many chiefs and not enough, right? Or that is so, or and folks might say, that is so gay, or that is so ghetto, or all these excuse me, all these kind of racial slurs come from a place of mindlessness. And when I say mindlessness, what do I mean? They're not thoughtful about that process. They're not mindful, right? And so in the absence of mindfulness, we might actually have mindful or mindlessness, right? So less mindful, right? So mindless. And so when we align our thoughts with our behaviors, then they become aligned in such a way that I am effective in everything I do. I believe that Abraham Maslow's hierarchy, right, that pyramid that we oftentimes talk about, where basic safety is at the bottom, we have so food, air, water is at the bottom, and then safety, and then there's this relationship, esteem, and then actually at the top of the pyramid is the self-actualization. I think this is where that self-actualization lives, right? So it is the recognition that my intentions and my behaviors are aligned. And so how do we align those? We align those with our values. We align those with our goals, right? And so when those things are aligned, that's when we're acting at our optimum, at our prime, if you will, right? And then engage in curiosity and not judgment. So curiosity, when we help people engage in curiosity, this allows us to explore new possibilities, right? To be able to say, well, you see that as a 9. Is it possible that the other person can see it as a 6, right? And when we open up that portal, if you will, that allows us to actually become more effective, because that's where our alignment comes from, right? So we seek to be effective in our communication, and so curiosity allows us to do that, where judgment does not, right? So no, it is a 9. For sure, can't be anything else. Anybody who says anything different is not only wrong, but there is something wrong with them, right? And as a matter of fact, because they are opposite of me, they are evil and I am good. And everybody who thinks that it's a 9 is good, just like me, right? And so what we see here is that this drives a stake in the division of being effective, right? So so if I'm a team leader, if I'm a community member, and I hold these, kind of absolute, I am good, and everyone else who doesn't agree with me is evil. How do we get past that, right? So what it was a lot like when I taught middle school, and I remember having a student say, uh, you got to earn my respect, a little eighth grader, you got to earn my respect. And I was like, okay, so what's the criteria for earning your respect? What is the, I said, do you have a syllabus? Is there a final exam? How do I know that I've done whatever you think I need to do to earn your respect? And he's an eighth grader. Kind of popped off, and he looked at me and he said, "I don't know," right? And I was being a bit facetious with that. And I knew he didn't know, right? I knew he was playing a tape that he had heard. And so one of the things that we talked about was that you just have to be respectful. Even when people are disrespectful to you, you have to be respectful, because that opens up opportunities for you. That says stuff about you that may not relate to them. Right. And so when we think in that way, we think about engaging in curiosity and not just judgment. It allows us to be more flexible, to see opportunities, to reach across so-called differences and try to see the other person's perspective and point of view. And in some cases, even their worldview may be very different from ours, but curiosity allows us to do that. And then offer other people what you need. Right. And so oftentimes, even in that piece of respect with the middle school student that I just shared with you, it was important that the middle school student learn how to be respectful regardless, right, of what other people are doing. Now, what I'm not saying is that what I wasn't teaching, and I'm not saying this here, is that we have to take disrespect. I do not believe that. I believe that there is a time and a place to stand up for yourself and to be an advocate for yourself and for other people. So that's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting, though, is in how do you determine what that is? And you determine what that is by aligning your goals with your intentions, right? So if my, so I don't want to give too many ancillary examples, but I just wanted to bring that point home, right? So offer what you need. So if I need, if I need dignity, then I give other people dignity, and that makes me more dignified. Right. If I need a certain level of understanding, then I need to practice giving that understanding. If I want someone to listen to me, it is best if I practice listening in the way that I want people to listen to me. And it comes out in real practical ways, right? So here's an example. So I had a neighbor, and I may have shared this story before, so pardon me, and I'm getting old, and so I repeat myself for emphasis. But I had a neighbor cursed like a sailor. Every word that the neighbor said was a curse word. I happen not to curse. I just think there are other ways for me to communicate, right? And I don't judge people who do, because for some folks, it's a necessary skill to release stress, to use their creativity, because sometimes people put words together. I'm like, ooh, I didn't even know you could do that, right? So he would do that on a regular basis. But because I never told him not to, right? But I communicated with him respectfully and engaged with him, and we developed a friendship. And the more he talked to me, the less he cursed. And the funny thing was, he started to apologize to me for cursing. I never said anything to him about cursing. I didn't, I wasn't putting my stuff off on him, but what he saw was a model that he he found valuable, right? So he found that our relationship was a valuable relationship. And so he adjusted to what he saw our relationship developing. And so oftentimes that's what we're in terms of conflict, we want the other person to change without recognizing that we need to change so that the other person can change, right? So we give them the olive branch, we give them the excuse, we give them the rationale for actually being different because we treat them differently, right? And then lastly, just give grace, right? So who I am today is not who I was even 10 years ago. It's not who I was 20 years ago. As a matter of fact, I hope I've changed in the last 7 days for the better, that I've become more refined, more in tune, in touch, more mindful of my speech and my behaviors as I continue to try to align those things, right? And so, so recognizing that grace is the training ground for allowing people to perfect who they are, for those people to become more self-actualized, it is necessary to have grace. And so again, I'm not saying that you willfully go out and make mistakes, or you willfully hurt people, or you willfully say disrespectful things or receive disrespectful things being said to you. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is, as you think about your alignment of your intentions and your behaviors, how much space do you have for yourself? How much space do you give other people for that alignment to occur, right? So there was a conversation, and someone said a racial slur, and immediately after they said it, they said, "I did not mean to say that." I'm like, I don't know where that came from. I just, and so I just asked. They said, "Well, I didn't mean to say that," and so I just asked. I said, "Well, what did you mean to say?" Right, and their response was, I really don't know. And so that became an opportunity for us to start thinking about, how do we become more mindful, right? How do we engage people in more effective strategies in their behavior? And then lastly, just one ground rule that I think is important for us to recognize is to focus our attention on the platinum rule, right? Treat others the way they want to be treated, which means that I have to have a relationship with them, so I know how they want to be treated, right? And so oftentimes as mediators in conflict, we sometimes miss those opportunities to do that, right? So that's important for us to recognize. I do want to go ahead and pay some bills just really quick and talk about our membership drive. And so as a member, you get some really cool access to some really cool things. And so you'll get opportunities to get discounts on our training conferences. You'll get access to live webinars. You'll get mentoring and coaching from other members. And, for those of you who are in need of scholarships, we have those available too. But at $60 a year, I think I spend more than that on coffee, right? I certainly spend that on 3 days of commuting, right? In terms of gasoline, or gasoline and chips and other things, right? So and coffee. So we recognize that that is just a meager amount to ask, and to be quite honest. The information and the networking that happens as a part of Conflict Resolution Minnesota is absolutely amazing. And the connections that I've been able to make in the community and the things that I've learned from folks in the community is par excellence, right? I mean, it's just absolutely great. So, so please consider that. And if you are already a member, share this information with someone else, right? So that we can grow this network, because we, Lord knows we need folks who are more effective in helping people navigate through conflict. Our polarized society is, quite frankly, it's a little bit scary how entrenched people are in their so-called camps, right? And we mentioned a little bit earlier about how people are like, well, you're evil if you don't agree with me. In the past, a disagreement meant an invitation to coffee, right? You don't agree with me, so let's talk about that. Help me understand where you're coming from, right? But those things have shifted, and we need mediators and navigators to help us pierce through some of that noise, to help people align their intentions with their behaviors, right? So important stuff. So I just want to pay a bill real quick and get that out the door. So let's spend a little time. Let's talk for a little bit, right? So I alluded to some things earlier and about human beings. And so I'm gonna stick a pin in this just for a second. And so there are four important truths about human beings that I want to address. One is human beings can learn, change, and grow. Right? That is a truism. There's no denying that we can learn, change, and grow. And as context changes, what does context demand of us? It demands that we also change, right? And so as context changes, so must we adapt to those contexts, right? So people can learn, change, and grow. The other thing that's important is that people do what they think works for them, even when it's ineffective, right? And they typically do those things because it has worked in the past, or it has worked in that particular context. And what happens when the context changes? Oftentimes, people don't adapt quickly enough, right? The third thing that's important to recognize is that all human behavior is goal-directed. So whether someone is articulate enough to say what their goals are or not, we recognize that human behavior is goal-directed. There is a reason, a rationale. There's a purpose for everything that we do. The car that you drive serves a purpose, right? Either as a mode of transportation, as a status symbol, as whatever. The clothes that we wear to work, serves a purpose. There is a goal that we're hoping to achieve through those articles of clothing, the clothing that we buy, right? There's certain clothes that we will never buy, and there are certain clothes that we must buy, right? So all of those serve a purpose. They are goal directed. And then lastly, an attitude is a external response to an internal goal achievement, right? So if one is achieving their goal, they have an externally good attitude, right? It is seen as being good or acceptable or pleasant, right? When one is not achieving an internal goal, it is displayed in a negative way, or it is said to be a bad attitude, right? And so when we think about this notion of attitude, whether it is good or bad is determined by the goal. So if I achieve my goal, I have a good attitude. If I don't achieve my goal, I have a bad attitude. But the determining factor is the defining of what the goal is, right? And so we have to recognize and pivot a little bit from just looking at the emotions, which is what I did as a kid, or that my father did about taking out the trash. He addressed those emotions and lost sight of the goal until he came to himself and said, I'm the adult here, and I still need you to take out this trash. We'll talk about those emotions, we'll talk about those behaviors, but I still need to get this goal accomplished, right? And so, so what is the goal of human behavior? And I would suggest that it is simply this recognition of safety, significance, and belonging, right? And when we talked about Abraham Maslow, Maslow has the 5 or the 7 tier pyramid, but I like to just boil it down to these 3. So when people are in conflict, when they are in conflict with one another, I would suggest that it is one of these 3, if not all 3, that is actually the root of the conflict, right? It was actually at the root of the conflict that I feel that this person is not taking my psychological safety seriously, right? Or I feel that this person is alienating me from a relationship that is beneficial to me, or that this person does not recognize the importance of the issue that is in our conflict. Excuse me. They don't recognize the importance of that particular thing to me, or they don't respect or recognize my significance. So let's peel those 3 things apart just a little bit. So first, safety. Are we physically, psychologically, spiritually, materially safe, physically safe in our environment? So that's that's one of the things that we're after. The second thing is that we're after is this recognition that I am safe, but I'm connected with people who want to help keep me safe. I'm connected with people who also understand my significance, right? Who understand my significance. And so when we think about this notion of significance, what is significance? Significance is the recognition that I have a life, that I have a life purpose. There is a goal for my existence. There's something I'm supposed to do on this planet. And whether that is something that, God says, let there be, or I decide, you know what, I am going to be XYZ kind of person, right? So when we think about this notion of conflict, what are the goals of human behavior? They're looking for safety, they're looking for significance, and they're looking for belonging. And when I get that, I have a positive attitude. When I'm denied that, I have a negative attitude, right? And so when we think about these, the conflict, and we think about it is we have very similar values, and that we're all after safety, significance, and belonging, then the conflicts that we're having become obstacle illusions, artificial barriers to authentic human relationships, right? And so when we think about what that means to be human, then we can start to align our intentions with our values, with our goals, and ultimately with our behavior. So I talked a little bit about this notion of the importance of recognizing emotions. And so oftentimes what happens is that when people are in conflict with each other or one another, or they have perceived conflict, people try to take apart a piece out of the equation, and they say, let's not talk about your emotions. Let's not bring your emotions into this. Well, what I would suggest is that emotions are just as powerful, just as important as other pieces of information. It is just information, right? So emotions are just information that is important to us, but we must align those things so that we get the outcome that we want. And so I am a strong proponent and subscriber to this notion of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So remember when I talked a little bit earlier in the introduction about being mindful, the importance of being mindful. And if you're not mindful, could it be that you are mindless, right? The quintessential feature of a zombie is acting, seeking out things, eating, but not being thoughtful about how and why they're doing the things that they do, right? Again, quintessentially, right? So when we think about this notion of cognitive behavior therapy, I really like this because this puts me back in the driver's seat, not only of my emotions, not only does it put me back in the driver's seat of my thoughts, it puts me in the driver's seat of my behaviors, right? So when we talked about this alignment, right, this becomes the process by which we can help people recognize how their thoughts, their behaviors, and their emotions are connected. And although this particular, the way I'm presenting this equation seems to lead us into one specific direction, I would suggest that there are many ways that we can approach this triune relationship, right? So you can start with the behaviors and then look at what are the emotions that are driving those behaviors, and then what are the thoughts that do that. Or we can talk about the thoughts. How do we adjust those thoughts to stimulate those emotions to get this kind of behavior? So you can start at any point in this, but the important part is to recognize the relationship between those. And so oftentimes when I'm in when I'm either running a circle or I'm doing a mediation, these are the things, these are the cards or the mental models that I'm holding in the back of my mind as I'm interacting with folks. And so I really try to help folks see those from other people's point of view and other perspectives, right? So important stuff. So it's also important to recognize that context is related to behavior, right? So certain types of behavior drive certain kinds of or are driven by certain kinds of contexts, right? So there are things obviously we would do at work that we may or may not do at home, or there are things at home that we may or that we probably shouldn't do at work, right? So so context drives behavior. And oftentimes what people who are in conflict fail to oftentimes realize is that as context changes, so must my behaviors, right? And some folks say, well, I can't change. I don't want to change. And I would say that you're missing out on some opportunities of being effective. So those people who want to be effective figure out what the context is requesting, what the context is demanding, and they seek to meet what the context is demanding through their behavior. And so when we do that, it allows us access to cognitive control. So when we are able to align our intentions with our behaviors through our values and our goals, and we're able to recognize our emotions plus our thoughts, have a relationship to our behaviors, then when we have these big scary things, these big scary spiders, if you will, we actually engage in cognitive control or mindfulness, right? So even though I don't understand something, I can act in a mindful way. I can act in a cognitively controlled way because all the things that are trying to stimulate me in a negative way to carry out primordial ways of being, I can now control those things and be effective in my communication. I can see things from others' perspectives, right? So what are some ways in which we can engage specifically in this cognitive control, this mindfulness process? Now, this is the one thing I will say. I know that there is a concept of mindfulness that oftentimes can be related to spirituality, that can be related to religious contexts and whatnot. And if that works for you, great. However, when I talk about mindfulness, I'm actually talking about the practice of aligning my intentions and my behaviors, right? So this notion of mindfulness is paying attention to what you do and why you do it and who you do it with and in what context you do it. And the more you're able to be mindful in that specific context, the more effective overall you become in everything that you do. The real driver to, and I believe, to a lot of human behavior is, or if you want to understand more effectively human behavior, asking the question why becomes essential, right? And before you go down a path of asking other people why, that's actually a question you should answer for yourself, right? So why do I do this? Why? It's funny. I reflect on, back in my young days, it was dating, and a young lady that I was dating asked me. She said, "Andre, you address the waitresses by their names on their name tags. Why do you do that?" And the funny thing was, I did not know. I did not have an answer until I dug deep. And what I figured out was I was inadvertently flirting with the wait staff, right? And so I had to ask myself, is that congruent with my values? And is that with my goals? Was that behavior demonstrating my intentions? And it wasn't. So I stopped that behavior. Right. So that big, scary spider, we can really manage through this process of being mindful, engaging in cognitive control, is a great asset. And so what's a tool that we can use to do that? I would suggest the ADKAR model. And I really like this. And this is typically used in organizational change or organizational development models, but I think it works great for personal development, right? So if we walk through the model suggests that there is this idea of pre-contemplation to change. So what is your awareness for the need of change, right? So what is your awareness of the need for change? Do you need to change? Has the context in some way shifted, augmented itself, transformed itself in ways that require you to be different? And so how do you assess that, right? How do you recognize the gap between your intentions and your behaviors, right? How do you assess that? And so some ways that people can assess that is having conversations with friends and family, people that you trust, right? It could be a rabbi, an imam, a pastor. So it could be, in some cases, a therapist. It could be a good friend who will tell you about yourself, right? You can do these online assessments, or you can do all sorts of personality traits to see where there's room for you to grow. The second part of the ADKAR model is recognizing that you have to have the desire to change. If you don't want to change, guess what's going to happen? If you don't want to change, you're not going to change, right? So you also must recognize, first of all, do you want to change? So the environment is demanding a set of behaviors. Do you want to meet those expectations? Your organization has a goal, mission. Your community has a goal or mission. Do you have the energy? Do you see what's in it for you, the desire to actually change? And then next is do you have enough information to be able to change? Do you know enough about your neighbor, right? Do you know enough about your community, about your organization, to be able to acknowledge that there was a history before you've had this conflict, a history before you've had to communicate this, or they've had to communicate this, a history of knowledge that you can glean from as you move forward. So that's important. And then next, are you practicing it? Do you have the ability for action? Do you have the ability for action? Are there opportunities for you to practice this new skill now that you have this awareness, now that you have this desire, now that you have this knowledge? Is there an opportunity to practice? And then lastly, how does that behavior get reinforced? Right. So what are the rewards? What are the benefits? What are the positive consequences of engaging in this process, either for you, for the organization, or for your community, right? And so when we think about this ADKAR model, I really like how this model demonstrates a method of engagement that is not only about change, but is about transforming, right? So there's a difference between change and transforming. And we can talk about that at another time in another lesson. But I do want to go back and pay a bill real quick. Again, membership, this is part of our membership drive. We want to say thank you so much for engaging in these thoughtful conversations with us. Membership is only $60 a year, and you get access to our webinars or live trainings, mentorship and networking. And so I want to say, if you already are a member, go ahead and renew your membership. We'd love to see that, as well as recognizing that we want to build this community. We want this to be a community because the world needs more people who want to seek our commonalities and recognize our differences as we knit our hearts and souls together. Right. So important stuff. Key takeaways, if you could just put in the chat room some of your key takeaways from the session. Send us an email about some of your key takeaways. We really love to hear from you, our members, and recognizing that it is because of you that we do what we do, and that conflict, again, is oftentimes an optical illusion, an artificial barrier to authentic human relationships, and that we can get past those things through communication and trying to see the other person's point of view, right? So those are some key takeaways. And so that actually wraps up our time. I want to say thank you so much for engaging in this particular conversation, being a part of this lecture series. I hope that you're getting some great things out of it. If so, give us a thumbs up. We love to hear from you. We love to engage with you. So we look forward to engaging in this process with you. And my name is Andre Koen, and I think we are out of here. So thank you so much. We look forward to engaging with you through the rest of the year and seeing what we can, the kind of world that we can create. Thank you.